Out of Oslo, Norway, Dimmu Borgir with Gateways from their album Abrahadabra, formed in 1993. They have a new album coming out next year. Very prolific band who has not slowed down since they began. And incidentally, the name is derived from Dimmu Borgir, which is apparently a volcanic formation in Iceland. I'm not sure if it's a particular formation or just any formation, but the name of which means dark cities or dark castles in Icelandic and Old Norse. So there you go. Dimmu has become the resident house band for Hexes and Soldiers, and I am Jason, and this is episode number 3. So, I caught an SPI infomercial on YouTube, and this thing is entertaining to say the least. It's aged, it looks old. I'm not sure what their purpose was in making this. I doubt it ever aired on TV. Um, but if you get a chance, just plug in SPI infomercial and you should be able to pull it up. And you should get quite a kick out of that, as I did. Shout outs, I'll give the usual shout outs to the usual crew. And will refrain from name dropping this episode, but may do so in the future, with one exception, and that is Marco Wargamer for his gracious thumbs up regarding episode 2 being on tap. That is greatly appreciated. We all know how busy he is with his multitude of reviews. He is also a father and husband, as well as a professor there in Indiana. And congrats to him because he has finally figured out a way to do what he loves and get paid for it. Apparently, he has come up with a class that he will be teaching that incorporates gaming, so that should be interesting. Wish I was a student so I could take it. Um, what else? Got my first thumbs down, and I want to thank whoever did that, and I look forward to more where that came from. Was starting to wonder if I was doing something wrong, that I had not received any negative reviews. Maybe people are just being nicer than necessary. That's fine. I'm not encouraging any negativity, but was just curious that, yeah, I hadn't received anything by way of negative review. And I've got my theories as to who the thumbs down person was and narrowed it down to either my mother or an ex girlfriend who shall remain nameless. But yeah, thank you for that, and good to know that I am being heard loud and clear. What else? Oh, thank you also to everybody who has given me an inverted thumbs down, and glad I could please some of you. Obviously, can't please everyone, but will continue to do my best. Also, got to go to a hockey game Thursday night, and a hell of a game it was. That means St. Louis Blues hockey. About a 2-hour drive here from the nerve center that is Columbia, and was reluctant to go at first. Didn't really want to go. Changed my mind for some reason, and I am glad I did. We thumped them 7-3, and that second period was probably the best second period I've ever seen the Blues play. And probably we now have a rivalry on our hands. Colorado will remember this. We get to play there in a couple weeks, lucky us, and I'm sure they will be ready. The Blues, of course, having their best opening by way of points in franchise record, I believe. And hats off to them for that. Hopefully they can keep it going. Alexander Steen, league leading scorer at the moment. So lots of good things going for the Blues. And if the Blues are doing well, then 9 times out of 10, I'm doing well. The move to New Orleans is on hold, as is my relationship with my girlfriend. So who knows what the hell will happen with that. It's up one day, down the next, and starting to become a bit nauseous on this roller coaster ride. But if you want to enjoy the excitement, you got to ride the ride. So I made another purchase. Now, last time I talked to you, I had purchased Kampfgruppe Shearer, Shield of Chom, and I haven't even played that yet and ordered another one. Well, Barbarossa, Game of the Russo-German War, 1941 through 45, came out in 86. TSR's reskinning, I believe, of the 1969 SPI game. And I just heard some of you sigh and saw a couple hang your head. But don't be discouraged. It was only $10, unpunched, and would be a nice addition to my Ostfront collection game-wise. So plugged another hole on the shelf. And at the doctor's behest, and when I say the doctor, that would be the doctor from Guns, Dice, and Butter, I began reading The Third Reich by Roberto Bolaño, and I'm a little over halfway through it, and it's okay. The story's okay, the writing's okay, but obviously, or not so obviously, the interesting aspects are these accounts that he gives throughout the story regarding his wargaming, because the main character is a wargamer. And specifically, I believe he's gaming Rise and Decline of the Third Reich, which is very cool. And but another thing that's cool is I can totally relate to this man, because his chick just does not understand his interest in wargaming, and the questions she asks and the way she regards it just, I can relate to that so well. And you know, my chick, or whatever she is at the moment, bless her heart, she's done her best to understand herself, what I see in this stuff, and she keeps her comments to herself. But when I read some of these things that are said, I just know that's what's going through her head. And yeah, so just pretty interesting to see my life somewhat displayed on these pages. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that, because I don't know that there are a lot of chicks out there that dig wargaming or are willing to. There's a few who are probably a little lopsided in the sanity department that want to do this, but they're out there. And but mostly, yeah, the chicks don't dig war games, and there's a reason for that. The Third Reich by Roberto Bolaño, and he's written a number of things. But yeah, the gems that he recounts throughout this book regarding the wargaming keep me going and is well worth the read. Somebody asks him, "What do you see in that game?" You know, referring to the game that he has set up, and he responds, "Clarity." And I think that speaks a lot, just that one word. Anyway, that's something else I've been up to. But regarding chicks and wargaming, I remember uh, my ex-fiance at the time was attending University of Missouri, and that was at the time when the Vagina Monologues was like out and everybody was going nuts over it. And for those of you not familiar with that, the Vagina Monologues was a book written by some chick, basically recounting stories of horror and praise regarding the vagina, kind of a reclamation of the name, I don't want to say feminist, but just kind of a vaginal celebration, if you will. And these couple people were going to come up and read snippets from the book on stage in this big auditorium, and I had to go because, as I said, my ex-fiance was involved in this, and so I drug my ASL rulebook there and sat through the Vagina Monologues reading ASL, and yeah, it was quite interesting. I got a number of interesting looks, and I'll get into it a little bit further, but I scrapped the Blitzkrieg Legend, the scenario I was working on, and I've set up a new one, so we'll get into that later. But first, I would like to relate to you the news of the week, and I have not checked Consim World today, though I have been checking it fairly regularly, and Not a lot going on by way of newness. Now that I've said that, something was probably posted this morning that I failed to catch, and it is probably earth shattering. If that is the case, you will hear about it next week, unless you already know, and I'm the last one to find out. So, I also have, let me interject this before I forget, and I'll do the rest of the news. A warning by way of suggestion, and I had posted on a ASL site that should I hold my breath for this Hackapelle finish module for ASL because it doesn't seem like it's going to happen, at least in this lifetime. Maybe in my next life I'll get it. So I guess, but my question was, do I seriously wait for this thing, or do I give in and pick up one of these modules that Critical Hit has put out? And they have the Fire and Ice finish module or scenario type deal, and then they have I can't think of the name at the moment, but they have another little finish thing that they had put out, and I thought, well, I'll pick one of these up, and that'll plug my finish absence when it comes to ASL. But the responses I have received with that post have been less than kind regarding Critical Hit. I had no idea. No offense, Critical Hit, but apparently your scenarios are unbalanced and you guys don't play test them. So, don't kill the messenger. It's just what I've been hearing, and that's unfortunate because you guys have a lot of product out. To think that it is all that way is discouraging. But I encourage anyone to be their own judge, and also I would encourage, obviously, any and everyone to buy official MMP product. Otherwise, this ASL thing wouldn't be what it is. MMP doing a great job and carrying on and supporting ASL and helping out the ASL community. So, once again, buy MMP. But if you gotta buy third party for whatever reason, or you're curious, maybe try LeFranc Terrier or Bounty Fire Productions. Maybe give Lone Canuck a try, or even Friendly Fire before you try Critical Hit. For those of you that do have Critical Hit and play it and love it, that's fantastic. Uh, Feel free to proselytize and spread the good word. But for those of you that don't like it, well, you don't have to play it. So there you go. And additionally, in case you didn't know, and that's what this section will be headed, in case you didn't know, Mark Pitcavage, who was an ASL, should be, if there was an ASL Hall of Fame, he should be in there if he's not already, has a site called Desperation Morale. And for those of you that are new to the game or new to the industry, I would encourage you to pause this show right now and go take a look. Just type in Desperation Morale and peruse that. I think it's got about anything and everything you could want to know about ASL, even third-party stuff. So thank you, Mark, for all you've done with that site, and will, I hope, continue to do. And back to the news. Let's see. Let's start with MMP, who I have still not heard back from, and breaks my heart. No, just kidding. Don't expect to hear back from them. That's fine. They got bigger fish to fry than the guppy that is myself. So they have their annual Black Friday sale, and anybody that sells anything is on this turkey sale weekend, go out and buy stuff deal. And I understand you want to make money. That's the whole idea behind selling something. But M&P has their Black Friday sale online, and it's going to be the weekend after Thanksgiving. That'll be 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time Friday, November 29th through 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time Saturday, the 30th of November. And good for them for doing it. I'm glad they're doing it. They're not just trying to make a quick buck. They're trying to move inventory out that maybe isn't moving as fast as they like. And we only stand to benefit. I mean, they're marking this stuff down. It's on sale. So there's no reason why somebody shouldn't log on and pick up a few games at a super affordable price. And so your Black Friday sale. Then you got, let's see, what else do they have? Winter Offensive will have the new Winter Offensive bonus pack, which is a little scenario and a map that comes out annually, I believe, at Winter Offensive. This will have a geomorphic map and 2 scenarios, the proceeds from which support the World War II Foundation. So, good stuff going on there. We'll also have Action Pack 9, which will be the 3rd action pack with the geomorphic wide maps. So, there you go with the ASL stuff. Last Chance for Victory, the monster game on Gettysburg that uses the line of battle system, is up. Take a look at that. It's been up actually, but look at it anyway. If you've seen it, look at it again. Reluctant Enemies and Operational Combat Series starter game. So anybody waiting for that, waiting for the courage to break into the OCS world, can now do so with this starter game. Reluctant Enemies. I encourage anybody to do so because the OCS series, as I have stated in the past, is a rewarding, once you learn it and pay your dues, a rewarding rule system that promises hours and hours and hours of entertainment. We also have Storm over Dien Bien Phu, which I believe was the Vietnamese attack on the French. The French held out in a defensive position, and Vietnamese just overran them. Basically ran them out of Vietnam. And yeah, so anyway, that is a card-assisted area move game on this famous siege, and apparently it is Brian Yelsa's favorite area move game. So give that a look if you like it. Pre-order it. Also, pre-order now while you can. Save yourself some money and get your games faster. That is direct from MMP to you. ASL Winter Offensive Bonus Pack 2010 and Action Pack 5 East Front are both back on the scene after a long disappearance. Both recently reprinted and are now available on the MMP website. So if you haven't recently, go to MMP, their website, check out what they got up, and pre-order some stuff or whatever. But take a look, and that brings us to GMT P500. Now you can pre-order the 1914 Glory's End When Eagles Fight 2-pack. Those will be sold together, not separately. New on their P500 Next War series is India versus Pakistan. I'm not too familiar with anything that India or Pakistan has going on other than a long rivalry, to put it nicely. Both, I believe, have nukes, so would be interesting if they did get into a major tiff. Clash of Giants Civil War Battles of Second Bull Run and Gettysburg is up, and probably been up. No Retreat, French and Polish fronts as well as Italian front. Twin Peaks Cedar Mountain Great Battles of the American Civil War Volume 7. Also, Rising Glory Napoleonic Series 20. The C3I Magazine number 27 is up, and that has over, I believe, 2,000 orders. That's a lot of readers for a Wargame magazine. That's great. I think there's room for another one, and somebody should get on that, because we could use another good Wargaming magazine. You know, back in the day, you had the General and the Wargamer, a number of things, but the General especially is was a great magazine with all their after action reports and reviews. And interestingly enough, in that book, The Third Reich, he even talks about the general, among other things. So, C3I Magazine and Coin Series Insurgency in Vietnam, Fire in the Lake. There's over 1,000 pre-orders for this now, so a lot of fans of the Coin Series, and I assume that will only grow. Triumph and Tragedy and Golan 73, looking a bit tired and dusty. I've been up there in the P500 for a while and could use a bit of a push. So anybody interested in that or on the fence, get off and pre-order now, or that thing is just going to rot. On to shipping for GMT. Let's see, November 15th, No Retreat, the North African Front began shipping. And sometime around November 25th, should see the Dark Valley as well as the Hunters begin shipping, if everything goes according to plan. And finally, I would like to make a mention of GMT's periodical, ongoing Tough Economy special. Now, they're not running that currently, but 5 times now, GMT has done this thing where they run a special that if you've been out of work for a year or more, that's, if you've been out for 366 days, you still qualify. It's not just a year. You get 2 free in-stock games. So provide proof that you've been out of work for a year or more. Get 2 free games. Now, the last one they did just ended November 1st, and when I saw that, I got excited until I realized that it hadn't been a year yet for me, which never thought I would be excited or have a reason to be excited about being out of work for a year, but this might give me a reason. Hopefully I have a job before I qualify for their next unemployed gamer special. Baffles my mind that a person with 2 college degrees cannot find a decent paying job, but hey, I'm sure I'm not the only one, and this economy is affecting everyone in its own way, some worse than others, and I certainly have a lot to be thankful for. So that's the news, and what I'd like to do next is break into the next segment, which will cover a history of war games, or a wargaming history, if you will. And in one of the previous episodes, I went into the history of the wargame industry, but wargaming itself does not, by any means, start with a game called Tactics. This stuff goes back probably to when people could throw sticks at each other and then devise better ways to do it with drawing in the sand. Anyway, I found a site called strategypage.com, first of all. There's an article on there called History of War Games, toward a history-based doctrine for wargaming. And a gentleman named Matthew Caffrey has written a wonderful little history of wargaming. He goes back before the glory days of the Prussians and recounts how wargaming was used, how it developed, how it changed over time. Very interesting stuff. I wanted to present it in total for you, but that would just be way too long. Maybe I'll put the earlier stuff in a future show, come back to it. What I've done is condensed it and covered primarily wargaming on the East Front in World War II. Wow, big surprise, right? Who would have thought I liked the East Front in World War II? Well, go figure. So that's what I'll do. And I will preface this by saying I, from time to time, I don't know how this got started, but I've watched lectures on YouTube now for a long time. I didn't even know such a thing existed. I thought it was all cats running around the house and what else? Babies making faces, things like that. But no, there are actually um, other things on YouTube. And a couple of people that I found, David Glantz, the name may ring a bell, the guy that wrote When Titans Clashed, How the Red Army Stopped Hitler. That guy. Also, Dr. Jonathan House, his co-author, each have uh, lectures that they have given, and I've watched them both. Extremely interesting and informative. Uh, I encourage anybody who is as masochistic as I am to watch those. So the information that they give will relate to what I'm going to go into here. And I'll start by saying there was this thing called Operation Otto, and that was the name of the Germans' war game scenario for going into the East Front. And that just right off the bat raises my hair because this is stuff that I would love to study more. I'd love to teach it. Anyway, this is their war game of the Eastern Front, Operation Otto. And this thing is conducted 3 different times. And the Germans, of course, attempting to game a long campaign through to its conclusion. They get through the third session and have only gamed through to early November. No plans for a fourth game, so they gamed it 3 times, but not as long as it needed to be gamed. There was a reason for this, and namely it was that the game predicted the destruction of 240 Soviet divisions, which allowed for only 60 to remain, and a front line that stretched from the gates of Leningrad in the north to the edge of Moscow and deep into the Ukraine. So surely the Soviets could not recover at such a point, right? Well, those officers who continued to have misgivings about the invasion after this war game suddenly felt they had no military basis to object. So, ironically, in the actual campaign, on the date that Operation Otto ended, the Germans had advanced about as far as predicted by the game and had actually destroyed more, that's 248 Soviet divisions. However, instead of the Soviets being down to 60 divisions as the game had predicted, they still had 220 divisions left. Now, how could the game be so wrong? Well, they got most of the details right. As far as the capabilities of individual Soviet divisions and their reconnaissance had given them a very accurate picture of the Soviet order of battle at the beginning of the campaign. But it's what they did not depict that misled them. The Soviets had a plan to mobilize entire new divisions upon the beginning of hostilities. And the German wargame made no provision for new Soviet divisions. So to make matters worse, beyond the time period wargame, the Soviets acquired an old ally, General Winter, which we'll get into in a second here, and also specifically how it relates to wargaming, so hang in there if you're getting bored. Expecting victory, German forces were woefully unprepared for winter fighting. Now, here we go. That leads us to, I think it was, I forget now, it was either House or Glantz. I think it was House. And he said that, interestingly, he said, that doesn't winter affect both sides equally? I mean, really? You know, the Germans cry and carry on about how winter prevented them from carrying out what would have been otherwise victorious campaign, but the Russians were not exempt from the effects of winter by any means. Certainly you can argue that one side perhaps was more prepared than the other side or what, but nevertheless, when it comes to winter, it doesn't hold up and affect one side lesser and another greater. Both sides were affected by this, okay? So it's intriguing to speculate how history might have been different if the Germans had held that fourth war game of Operation Otto, which they did not do. Now, of According to Dr. Jonathan House, who, as I said earlier, was the co-author with Glantz on this When Titans Clashed, How the Red Army Stopped Hitler, and by the way, that is one of these seminal works on the Eastern Front. Anyway, the logisticians studied an invasion of Russia in the fall of 1940 concluded that what would happen is what in fact did happen. See, they stated that after about a 500-mile drive into Russia, they'd run out of fuel and ammo. So the roads would be so poor, and with the railroad gauge difference compounding matters, you got the whole gauge thing, and the Germans had to change these railroads as they got deeper into Russia. It was demonstrated that logistical support would fail to keep pace after the first 2 months, after which the drive would have to start and stop repeatedly to allow for supplies and infantry, for that matter, to catch up with Panzer and mechanized corps. And this is in fact what occurred, over the next 2 years of the invasion. So Hitler was apparently never informed of this logistics stuff, and it was actually Franz Halder who ensured that the report didn't go any higher than him. I guess he was confident enough that things would be okay, or maybe he didn't want to upset his seniors. Either way, whatever his excuse, the report stopped there. At about the time of the first phase of the Operation Otto war game, the Red Army was also wargaming a German invasion. Now, the Russian plan for a German invasion was to initially stand on the defensive and wear the Germans down in a fighting retreat. Then, when the Germans were stretched thin, the Soviets would counterattack. While the war game worked, the Germans penetrated way deeper into the Soviet Union than anticipated. When Stalin was briefed on the outcome, he was outraged. And unfortunately, when Stalin gets mad, heads roll, so it's a big deal. This exercise appeared to have 3 impacts. Stalin blamed the deep penetration on the Red Army waiting too long to counterattack, first of all. And this may help explain the premature counterattacks made in the actual invasion. The war game did alert Soviet leaders to the possibility of deep penetrations by a German invasion, so the actual German advance was probably somewhat less of a shock than it really was. Finally, Stalin concluded that one of the reasons the Red Army did so poorly was that the young general playing the Germans had done a brilliant job. Already well thought of by Stalin, this increased Zhukov's stature even further. Now, why did Germany lose to the Russians? Well, that brings us back to Mr. House and his particular lecture that he gives, and he talks about 3 alibis, 3 excuses, more or less, that the German commanders gave in their accounts as to why the war in the East failed. And the first one regards Hitler, and the commanders repeatedly in their accounts after the war point their finger at Hitler and accuse him of meddling in their affairs and interjecting here and there and changing his mind willy-nilly, and some of that's true. But to the extent that they place the blame on him for things going wrong is unrealistic. And they themselves tend to take little, if any, of the blame. Perhaps that is one of the benefits of surviving a war and being able to write about it afterwards. But be that as it may, things were not as they say. So House goes on to say that it was the generals, with the exception of Guderian and Model, that 2 years into the drive were still telling Hitler, attack, 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 attack. In Kursk, Hitler went along with it. They continued to attack as he was told. Well, Kursk failed, among other things, and Hitler was typically the one who was remembered for his failures, more so than the commanders. So Hitler figured out fairly early that the drive would be long and wrought with attrition, okay? And he wanted the oil fields primarily for this reason. The commanders, however, wanted traditional targets. They wanted political targets, say, for instance, Moscow. But if you look at your history, Another person took Moscow, and that had no effect. In fact, Napoleon was dumbfounded when he got to Moscow, not because it had been depleted of anything of value, that is to say, food, everything was gone or burned, but that he waited there and waited and waited, and nothing happened. Russia didn't give in. They just kept fighting. And he didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to deal with that. So it would have been a similar situation. Don't think that anything would have been different, especially with Stalin. So the Germans moved to Moscow and take it. Fine, then what? The war would just continue, and then they'd have to go to the oil fields anyway. So outside, let's see. Let me back up. Actually, thinking about the Napoleon Hitler connection, someone, and now maybe someone's already done this, but that would be a hell of a read if someone would compare the two, Napoleon and Hitler, because the nature of the Eastern Campaign has a lot of similarities from its beginning with Napoleon originally wanting to invade Britain, scrapping that idea and heading east, as did Hitler, who with Operation Silo was geared up to invade Britain, but as well changed his mind and headed east. And it would be, as I said, interesting to compare and contrast as well the campaign that each commander, each person undertook in the east, and see how that measures up. Outside of Moscow in 41, the commanders wanted to retreat, but Hitler says no. So here's an example of the commanders wanting to do what they want, and Hitler not letting them. But this is a good thing because if Hitler had given in, even though all along commanders are saying attack, 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 they want to retreat. Probably, I assume to gear up for another attack, and I understand that. But to retreat would have meant, okay, the Germans were set up about as good as they could be for the winter. They had some shelter there where they were. To retreat would have meant leaving all this behind, and probably would have led to the end of the army, honestly. And the fact that Hitler didn't do this and allowed them to have somewhat of shelter by not retreating, he probably saved the army and no doubt prolonged the war. So whether Hitler was in fact cognizant of this fact is unclear, but yeah, it may have simply been the strategic decision of an old World War I corporal and the old stagnant hold your ground thing, but the decision was a good one because it saved the army, at least allowed them to fight another day. And additionally, there are examples of this, which is the whole point of my going into this long tirade. I wanted to present examples of this within games. And I didn't scour the shelves or the internet, but I did find within A Victory Denied a hint of this. And they have what's called Hitler Directive. And at the end of turn 6, the German player rolls in the Hitler Directive table with 3 possible results. The first one being Objective Moscow. And this states that Hitler has directed the German player to capture Moscow, and this causes the game to end at the end of turn 10. The second one being Hitler Distracted, and this has been Hitler has been distracted by other objectives, so basically the German player is forced to remove 4 of his motorized units. Third one and final one is Guderian's Choice, which basically has the player pick one of the above 2 options. So there is an attempt in a game to incorporate some of that Der Fuhrer interfering and meddling in the affairs of what the generals considered their affairs, and if they only had their way, things would have gone differently, no doubt, according to them, victoriously. As a side note, also, I forgot to mention, as I was flipping through that Victory Denied rule book, I got to the end and noticed that this series, the Victory Lost and Victory Denied series, was not by any means supposed to end with a victory denied. And Adam Starkweather says that at the end of the rulebook, he planned to release a Victory Approaches, which would cover the autumn battles of Hungary in 44, as well as a Victory Won, which would cover the final battle of Berlin. Then goes on to state other ideas he has. And, well, whatever the hell happened to that? I mean, it's a great series. Victory Lost is a wonderful game. Would love to see another game in the series, if not a couple. So I hope he hasn't just totally chucked the idea out the window. Certainly he's got that in his to-do list somewhere. So hopefully in the future we can see additional titles in that series. The last thing that I would mention regarding Hitler's meddling in the affairs of his commanders, the Blitzkrieg Legend, having just played that recently, has these things called pause checks, and that is an attempt in the game to reflect the high command, namely Hitler, holding up these panzer drives. Basically the whole British expeditionary force was allowed to leave and head back to England, and this should have never occurred. But the story goes is Hitler was unaccustomed to these quick drives, these far-reaching drives, and was concerned, so held the drive up to give everyone time to catch their breath and make sure things were going as they should be. And you got to remember this style of warfare was still somewhat, if not completely, new at the time. I mean, prior to this, you had stagnating fronts and just major defensive positions and pound the hell out of each other and nobody move. But it's changing and it's making people nervous. So that is the first section. The second section, and this resorts back to Dr. House's 3 alibis that the Germans have used regarding why the war in the East was lost. The second covers the numbers game, and by numbers I mean the sheer outnumbering of troops and materiel the Russians had compared to the Germans. But the interesting thing is, and House mentions this, is that why wasn't this complained about when the Germans were winning in the early days of the invasion? They're just as outnumbered then as they are later on in the war, but nobody's complaining because they're winning. They're kicking ass. So if you're outnumbered, you're outnumbered. And whether it's you're winning or losing, the fact remains you're outnumbered. But they didn't bother to complain about it when they were winning in the early days. It wasn't until the later days when things were getting tough and they started complaining about the Russians and their sheer numbers. But also in the early days, there was surprise and the shifting of the Soviet military from within that helped in these early victories. The Soviets were undergoing a complete rehaul of their commanders and the way they did things militarily. And when the Germans moved in, they were literally, the Soviets, in the midst of this change and were caught off guard. And but as time went on, the Soviets that survived, there's that old Darwin's thing, the strong survived and only got stronger. But the Soviets were able to learn from their mistakes and eventually adapted their battlefield strategy accordingly, copying what they saw on the battlefield via the Germans, but also, to give them credit, doing things their own way, and it was starting to become effective. Now, the Germans underestimated the Soviets' ability to adapt and change and improve ultimately. So the Germans also thought they would advance so rapidly, being outnumbered wouldn't matter. So when you bring up the numbers thing in the beginning, they didn't figure that they would even be there long enough to have to deal with it. They would roll through there and the Soviet Union would collapse, and that would be the end of it. But as we know, that wasn't the case. Also, the Germans' own philosophy held to quality over quantity. So the Russians focused more on quantity, while the Germans focused on its antithesis. But the two clashed, and uh, only one would be victorious. Also with the quality thing and the Germans, I understand they had like these great tanks and these great planes, but they could never really like make up their mind. And part of that, I guess, maybe you could point the finger at Hitler, but you needed to just settle on a tank design, settle on a plane design, and just produce the thing. How many tank designs and planes did they have? And that causes like a competition for scarce material as the war went on, and it just only served to like work against them as the war carried out. And it seems like if the Germans could have settled on a particular design and mass produced it, it would have benefited them more. Uh, Look at the Americans in the Sherman tank. They just pumped it out and pumped it out and pumped it out. A subpar thing. But if the Germans, with like say a Panther or a Tiger, a Panther, just focused on that and pumped it out, how effective would that have been? Maybe. I don't know. Just a theory. Additionally, the Germans didn't have any reserves, so that was a big factor in the numbers game. And that also, I'm sure, can relate to the fact that they didn't plan on this war lasting that long, so why the hell would you need reserves? Also, the Germans underestimated the total Russian strength, and you can't do that. I mean, you look on paper at the strength of the enemy, regardless of what it says, you still have to assume they're 100%. You just have to. You don't send an army in to fight and not assume that the enemy is going to be any less than 100%. You just can't do it. And the Germans did that. So, one final thing that aided the Russians in regards to numbers was just they didn't just have sheer numbers and leave it at that. And yeah, they had human waves, and I understand all that. But as the war went on, they got more clever in their utilization of these numbers. And there were a lot of times that deception was used, and the Russians referred to it as maskirovka. And this deception was used to cause Germans to concentrate troops in an area or in anticipation of a particular strategic area that would allow the Russians to go to another area with actual units and encircle the Germans, who by then it was too late to help themselves. And it was the numbers indeed that helped the Russians, allowed them to do this, but it was the way in which they used the numbers that made it successful. So there is that. Finally, the third alibi, and the one that I have decided to focus on the most within gaming. And obviously, I didn't go into the numbers game within conflict simulation. Uh, that is to say, the games that we play for time purposes, but I'll do so with this weather thing, and more specifically, general winter. And it's commonly thought that Hitler didn't provide winter clothing because he didn't want to hurt the morale of the troops by making them think they'd be there that long. So, or that they wouldn't need it because the invasion wouldn't last longer than 4 months was actually used. It was said that they wouldn't be there longer than 4 months because a lot of these troops that went in were used in industry back in Germany. And the industrialists, for lack of a better term, wanted to know when they would get these people back because they were needed. And Hitler said 4 months, because that's apparently the amount of time they allotted for the fall of the Soviet Union. And Germans had winter clothing, okay? Don't think that they didn't. But they couldn't deliver it. And because of the nature of the railroads, and the further they got into Russia, the harder it was to supply. Now, in 41, there simply wasn't a way to carry everything. I mean, they had food, ammunition, troops, equipment, and winter clothing. Well, just leave that behind for now. So the winter clothing gets left behind. And actually, this wasn't Hitler's decision. It was decided by other staff officers, and that's how it went down. But regarding General Winter and gaming, I went through a number of titles on my shelf and checked it out. And there's some pretty interesting takes on how certain games handle it, some differences. So I thought I'd go into that and title it Walking in a Winter Wonder Hex, and I apologize for that. Now, we'll start off with Barbarossa, the SPI title from '69. And what they have going is, for winter, the Axis units must be adjacent to a supply unit to attack. Now, that seems pretty strict, but that's what they have it. And both motorized units and infantry have their movement reduced. So that's how they deal with it in Barbarossa. Then War in the East, the first edition from '74, has during snow turns all non-Finnish Axis mechanized units have both their attack strengths and movement halved. Axis rail capacity is halved. The supply range for non-Finnish Axis units is reduced. So winter is affecting the Germans all over the place here. The Axis player may only use half of his available air points, while available Russian air points are unaffected by snow. Why is that? Finally, during snow, the Axis player uses a different, which is to say, more or less effective combat results table than the Russian. Wow. And during game turns 21 through 40, each turn, the Axis player must reduce one intact German infantry division into a comp group by flipping the unit over. So this rule represents the effect of the German High Command's failure to issue proper winter clothing, there you go, and equipment to the units during the years 41 through 42. Now, during Russian turns, for each ground attack made by the Russian player, he may choose to substitute the combat result with an attack or retreat result. So that is how they deal with it. Then you have Operation Typhoon in '78, SPI title. Units are assigned either good or bad winterization levels. All German units are considered to have poor winterization levels. All of them? Wow. And each individual Russian counter will then reveal whether or not it has good or poor winterization. And when snow is present, the length of German supply lines is reduced from 6 to 4 hexes. But that doesn't occur in any way, shape, or form for the Russians. Soviets have ski units that are never detrimentally affected by snow when it comes to movement. When snow is present, Soviet ski units get a bonus when attacking, while Germans suffer a penalty. So Germans not faring well winter-wise in Operation Typhoon. Fire in the East, 1984 game. During the first winter in certain zones, and there's a total of 4, Axis attacks, except those made by Finnish troops, that is, suffer a -1 to their combat die roll. And winterization attacks into non-city fortress hexes may have combat resolution die roll modified due to the winterization of the involved units. And there are 3 levels of winterization, those being all mountain and ski units are winterized. All Soviet winterized, that is, those designated as such by color, as well as NKVD and Guards units, all winterized. Additionally, all Finnish SS and Luftwaffe ground units are winterized. So there's that. Moscow 1941, the TSR 87 version. Temperature check, ground condition check, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Germans received 2/3 the initiative points during a snow turn, while Soviet rail capacity is reduced to 2. Deep snow, Germans receive half the initiative points that turn, while the Soviet player receives 2/3, and the Soviet rail capacity is reduced to 1. While for Arctic weather, there's a -4 penalty to all German attacks and a -3 penalty to all Soviet attacks. So there's definitely discrepancies, as to be expected, but it's just interesting how each game handles it. East Front, second edition. Let's see, initiative. The Axis player has, and that's the Columbia Games 2006 version. The Axis player has the first player turn in dry and mud, but the Soviet player has the first player turn in snow. So for snow, Axis headquarters only are disrupted, which basically means they have a lesser combat value, which essentially amounts to a handicapped command range, and nothing is stated like that for the Russians. Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2. Germans have, let's see, frozen engines that come up. On the first moderate freeze or deep freeze turn of 41, and this will happen once only, you roll a die for each Axis yellow symbol unit, and this includes panzers among other things. On a 1 or 2, you simply destroy the unit. Frostbite, you have that as well. When the first freeze occurs of 41, roll 1 die for each Axis infantry division. On a 1 to 3, destroy 1 step of that division. And in case blue has the same mechanics with truck attrition, which applied in the first turn of freeze after a mud turn. Roll 1 die for each truck point in the German army. On a 1, remove it. And finally, general winner as represented within Wargames. Red Star Rising from 2007 has 3 conditions: clear mud or snow, and a snow turn. Soviet units pay only 2 points to leave a contested zone instead of the usual 3, so they get a bonus as opposed to the Germans getting a penalty. Soviet units pay only 2 movement points instead of the usual 3 to overrun. And the Guards cavalry may move from one contested space to another, I assume, with no penalty. So that is that. You can share that amongst yourselves next to a warming fire and anticipate General Winter paying us a visit. It is right around the corner. Also have a little section on wargamers, famous wargamers. I'll abbreviate this. I think Churchill was a wargamer. Kissinger's favorite game was allegedly diplomacy. Can you imagine that? And apparently this game was also popular with the Kennedy administration, so that's pretty interesting. Who else? Kurt Schilling, we already know about him. Corey Wells of Three Dog Night has been known to frequent Consim World in the past, and Dalai Lama talks about in his autobiography playing with British soldiers as a kid. Interesting stuff there. What else? We have got, by way of request from the big board, go more into OCS. We all know, or some of us may not, the big board deals with, as it's called, big boards, and the OCS is not small. Typically, a lot of these scenarios are gigantic monster things, though OCS does offer in each game typically a smaller scenario or scenarios, and that is appreciated. Go more into OCS. Well, as I stated at the beginning, and I'll go more into that now, I had the Blitzkrieg Legends set up. I did the North scenario, messed up on supply, switched to the South, had that set up, was rolling through, doing fine. I had Germans rolling through, attempting to exit off the west to gain victory points, namely panzer and mechanized units. The French correctly anticipated this, proceeded to form a wall in front of the Germans, And somewhere along the way, I became unclear or confused regarding supply, and it became hard to determine if, in fact, the German units that had started to move west were, in fact, out of supply. I probably sound like I'm rambling, and I am. But what I'm basically getting at is the whole damn supply thing I have trouble with. And I have trouble with it because A, I only understand about 90% of it, and B, I'm not good at it. And I would assume most people aren't. And supply is not something you typically have to worry about in a game, and you should. It sounds boring. It sounds not fun, but isn't an aspect of the game if you're playing a true conflict simulation that you need to consider. And I know some of these games try to account for it and do so abstractly, and that's fine. But to really have to deal with it shows what you're made of. And apparently, I'm not made of much, at least yet. I've got supply issues, and long story short, I just scrapped the whole scenario. I didn't know if I had been fair to the Germans with this supply issue, and I couldn't, in good conscience, continue the game with that in doubt. So I just scrapped the whole thing and thought, you know what, I'm gonna play Shoots and Ladders because I need a break, and or Candyland, but I held back and could have done something else. Could have done something like busted out Commands and Colors, Napoleonics, and just had a beer and pretzels type weekend. But no, I stuck with the OCS stuff, and I have gotten out Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2 and proceeded to set up and start the little tiny initial scenario they have in there. And, well, things are going well, but it is early, and things always go well when it's early. As the game goes on, yours truly runs into supply problems. So we'll see how it goes this time. And one thing I've learned that I have not been doing, I recommend to all of you OCS newbies out there, do not be afraid to use railroads to move your supply forward. I, for some reason, have been neglecting to do that, so I plan on amending that in this next scenario. I like the victory conditions of this scenario. Very straightforward. Move in, take and hold three key cities as the Germans, as the Russians prevent this from happening. Only 3 turns in length, this scenario, so should be able to handle this. And I had a question about overruns, if somebody out there could better break it down for me. Namely, if you have a stack and only part of the stack commits an overrun in an adjacent hex and eradicates the enemy unit in that hex, can then the units that did not participate in the overrun move in and through that now open hex in the same movement phase? This might be a dumb question, but I am unclear on that. And also, anybody out there that uses extenders, I'm wondering how often do you do that? Should you need to do that? Am I doing something wrong that I need to do that? Or am I doing something right by not needing to do that? So I'm unclear on extenders and a number of other things, and I won't go into all of them here, but needless to say, OCS is demanding rule system by way of comprehension, and I will continue to tackle it. And as much as I've learned, I still have a lot to learn, as I've mentioned. So that's that. I'll finish this scenario. I'm not sure if I will continue on with Blitzkrieg, or rather, Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2. So we'll see how that goes. I may do that, or, I also have Case Blue, DAC 2, Hube's Pocket, Baltic Gap, and they're all sitting there staring me in the face. And I'm sure they'd like to get played at some point. Whether I do or not, who knows? I definitely may take a break after Guderian's Blitzkrieg. So that might in fact, be it for this episode. I had no idea it would run this long. I apologize if I've kept you over. If you have things to do, if you have kids at soccer practice that are wondering where dad is, should have been there over an hour ago, blame me. I'm happy to take the blame. And that's about it from the Nerve Center, that is Columbia, Missouri. Episode 3, Hexes and Soldiers. What's on tap for the next episode? More the same. I know I mentioned last time that I would go into wargame conventions, sift through them, which ones are worth going to, which ones are worth missing. Obviously, this thing's gone way too long, so I'll save that for next time. And I apologize for those of you that were looking forward to that. And I will have whatever I am playing next as a topic. And also, I'd like to ask you guys to suggest your favorite games, because there's bound to be something out there that I haven't tried because maybe I think it sucks or it doesn't deserve the time. But I am an open-minded individual, and if somebody says, "Hey, you got to try this game," I'll do it, and I'll give my opinion of it, an honest one. And there might be something out there that I'm not aware of. I'm sure there's tons of things out there I'm not aware of and would probably never try, but at the behest of someone would do so and may end up, in fact, thanking that person for introducing that game to me. So there's that. And again, feel free to post anything by way of feedback, comments. It is all greatly appreciated. That is it. So, as usual, thank you for listening and keep gaming. Seriously?